A man in the finest white linen stands motionless in an Egyptian throne room. Below him, 10 men kneel with their faces to the marble floor. They came for grain. They have no idea who he is. He knows exactly who they are. The Quran calls his story the best story ever told. But to understand why, we need to go back. Back to a tent in the desert. Back to a dream that changed everything. This is the story of Prophet Yusuf, alayhi salam, the son of Yaqub, the grandson of Ishaq, the great-grandson of Ibrahim, 4 consecutive generations of prophets, the most noble bloodline in human history. No other family has ever carried that weight, generation after generation. Ibrahim was chosen by Allah. Ishaq was chosen after him. Yaqub after Ishaq. And now a young boy named Yusuf was about to be chosen for something that none of them, not even his father, could fully prepare him for. Yaqub lived in the land of Canaan with his 12 sons. Among them, Yusuf and his younger brother Binyamin held a special place in their father's heart. Not because a father should love one child more than another, but because the heart has its own compass. And Yaqub's heart was drawn to these 2 with a force he could not explain and did not try to hide. The other 10 brothers noticed. They noticed every glance, every touch on the shoulder, every time their father's eyes softened when Yusuf walked into the room. They worked the flocks. They carried the heavy loads. They sweated under the sun while Yusuf stayed close to their father. And the resentment grew not suddenly but slowly, like a crack in a wall that no one bothers to repair.
Yusuf and his brother are more beloved to our father than we are, though we are a strong group. Indeed, our father is in clear error.
That is what they said among themselves. And most people, when they hear this verse, assume the brothers were simply evil. But look at the words again. Though we are a strong group, they did not see themselves as villains. They saw themselves as the overlooked majority. 10 sons who worked harder, who carried more, who showed up every day. And yet their father's love always drifted toward one boy. Jealousy rarely begins with malice. It begins with a feeling of injustice. And that is what makes it so dangerous, because the jealous person genuinely believes they are the victim. Decades later, these same brothers would kneel before a minister they do not recognize, begging for grain in a famine. The boy they thought they had erased from the family would hold their survival in his hands. And when they finally learn who he is, the shame of that childhood jealousy would hit them harder than any punishment ever could. But that was many, many years away. And then, one night, Yusuf had a dream. He rushed to his father early in the morning, breathless.
"Oh, my father, I saw 11 stars, and the sun and the moon. I saw them prostrating to me."
Yaqub's face changed. He gripped his son's arm, not with anger, but with something deeper. A father's hand closing around a child's wrist. A man who had been given the gift of prophecy, now reading his own son's future in a dream. And seeing both the magnificence and the devastation that lay ahead.
"O my son, do not relate your vision to your brothers, or they will contrive against you a plan. Indeed, Shaitan is to man a clear enemy."
Notice what Yaqub did not do. He did not dismiss the dream. He did not laugh. He did not say it was just a dream. Yaqub was a prophet. He recognized revelation when he saw it. And in that recognition lay something beautiful and terrifying, a father who knew his son had been chosen for greatness, and who also knew that greatness would require a price that both of them would pay across decades of tears, separation, and waiting. Yaqub's warning was not fear. It was the grief of a man who already saw the road ahead and could not change a single step of it. But somehow, as it always happens, the brothers found out. They gathered on a rocky outcrop at dusk, away from the tents, away from their father's hearing. The 10 brothers, all of them, with fire in their eyes and a plan taking shape in the dying light.
"Kill Yusuf.
One of them said,
Or cast him out to some distant land. Then the face of your father will be only for you.
and then the most chilling part, and you can be righteous after that. That last phrase, and you can be righteous after that, deserves to sit with you for a moment. They were not planning a crime and calling it a crime. They were planning a crime and calling it the first step toward becoming better people. The most dangerous sin is the one dressed in the language of self-improvement. Every tyrant in history has told himself, just this one terrible thing, and then I will be good. The brothers were no different. One of them pushed back. Not out of love for Yusuf, but out of practical mercy.
Do not kill Yusuf. Throw him into the bottom of the well. Some caravan will pick him up.
And they agreed. Murder was too far. Abandonment they could live with. The next morning they went to their father with smiles on their faces.
Send Yusuf with us tomorrow,
They said, reaching for warmth they did not feel. Let him enjoy himself and play. We will take care of him. We will be his guardians. Jacob looked at them. Something tightened in his chest, a knot he could not name, a dread that had no words.
It troubles me that you should take him,
He said. And I fear that a wolf would eat him while you are heedless of him. A wolf? Did Jacob really fear a wolf? He was a prophet. He could read hearts better than any man alive. He knew the real wolves were already inside his own tent. He knew their looks, their whispered conversations, the way they fell silent whenever Yusuf entered the room. He said wolf, because that was the excuse they could all pretend to believe. And in that single word wolf lay the entire tragedy of a father who saw the truth, knew it in his bones but could not say it out loud. What could he do? Accuse his own sons of plotting murder based on a feeling? Lock Yusuf inside forever? Refuse and watch the resentment deepen into something even worse? He relented, against every instinct, against every warning inside him. Jacob watched them disappear over the ridge, Yusuf walking among them with the innocence of a boy who trusted his older brothers. He never saw his son's face again. Once they were beyond sight of the camp, the masks dropped. They seized Yusuf, they stripped the tunic from his body, the very garment their father had given him. He called their names, he reached for their hands. Not one of them reached back. They lowered him into the well. The well was deep. The walls were rough stone, slick with moisture. The sky was a circle of blinding white light far above his head. So far it looked like a coin. The air down below was cold and smelled of damp earth. And in that darkness alone, abandoned by the people who were supposed to protect him, a boy sat at the bottom of a well with nothing. And then Allah spoke, not to the brothers walking away, not to Jacob sitting in his tent clutching the absence where his son used to be. Allah spoke to the boy in the well. You will surely inform them of this affair of theirs while they do not perceive. In human terms, this is extraordinary. A child at the bottom of a dry well, stripped and abandoned, being told by God, you will one day confront these very men. Not from the bottom of this well, from above them. Not as their victim, as their judge, and they will have no idea who you are. The guarantee came at the lowest point, not the highest. When there was nothing left to hold on to, God gave Yusuf the only thing that mattered, a promise. Decades from now, Yusuf would stand in Egyptian white linen in a throne room, looking down at 10 rough-robed men kneeling before him, and he would say, do you know what you did to Yusuf and his brother? When you were ignorant, the promise whispered in the well would be fulfilled in a palace. But that was a lifetime away. The brothers returned to Yaqub at nightfall, weeping. They had rehearsed their grief. They had practiced every word.
Oh, our father, we went racing with one another and left Yusuf with our belongings, and a wolf ate him.
They held up his tunic smeared in animal blood, a prop designed to sell the lie. Yaqub took the tunic. He held it up. He turned it in the firelight. His prophet's eyes moved across the fabric, searching, and what he saw told him everything. The fabric was intact. No claw marks, no tears, no rips from teeth or claws. A wolf that devours a boy but leaves his shirt in perfect condition. Yaqub saw through the lie in seconds, but here is the part people miss. He did not confront them. He did not rage. He did not demand the truth. He did not point at the unstained fabric and say what every father in the world would have screamed, liars. Instead, he said,
Rather, your souls have enticed you to something. So, Sabr Jamil, beautiful patience, and Allah is the one sought for help against that which you describe.
That was not weakness. That was a man who understood that human justice sometimes cannot reach where it needs to. And so he placed his case before the only judge who sees everything, hears everything, and forgets nothing. 3 shirts run through this entire story. Remember that. The first shirt, the bloodied one, carried a lie. It was designed to end a father's hope. It was smeared with false blood to simulate a death that never happened. And yet the fabric itself told the truth, intact, undamaged, untouched by any predator. The lie was visible in its own evidence to anyone willing to look. The second shirt has not appeared yet, but when it does, it will carry evidence, torn from behind, proving innocence rather than guilt. And like the first shirt, the truth it tells will be ignored by the people who hold it. The third shirt comes last, and it will carry something neither of the first 2 could: healing. Lee. Evidence. Healing. 3 shirts, 3 messages, the thread that holds this entire story together. Meanwhile, at the well, something was about to happen that no one had planned. A caravan heading toward Egypt stopped nearby. A water-bearer, a man whose name the Quran does not give us, whose face history never recorded, walked to the well at dawn, rope coiled over his shoulder, expecting nothing more than a morning's work. He lowered his bucket. It caught on something. He pulled, heavier than water. Much heavier. When the bucket rim broke the surface, a boy's face appeared, blinking against the light. Dusty, frightened, alive, the water-bearer's hands froze on the rope. Then he called out the words that bridged the well and the throne.
Good news! Here's a boy!
Who was this man? The Quran gives us nothing else about him. But think about what he did. He lowered a bucket expecting water and pulled up a boy who would change the course of Egyptian history. He had no idea. He was just doing his job. How many times has God used someone who was simply doing their job to redirect the path of everything? The water-bearer teaches us something we often forget. You do not have. To know your role in the plan, to be essential to it. The caravan took Yusuf to Egypt, and there, in a dusty marketplace that smelled of livestock and spice, they sold him. They sold him for a miserable price. A few dirhams. A few dirhams. Pocket change, a future prophet, a future king, a future savior of an entire civilization. Sold for a price that would not buy a decent pair of sandals. And the men who sold him thought they had made a fair deal. They regarded him as worthless. But here is the twist that only becomes visible from the end of the story. The low price was the mechanism of God's plan. If Yusuf had been expensive, a merchant would have bought him. Someone interested in profit, someone who would have put the boy to work and forgotten about him. Instead, a minister bought him. Al-Aziz, one of the most powerful men in Egypt, stood in that trading plaza, surrounded by merchants and shouting vendors and stacked goods, and his eyes landed on a boy standing silent among the chaos. Not just beauty, dignity, a boy who stood like he was born to rule. Al-Aziz purchased Yusuf immediately and brought him to his household.
Make his stay comfortable.
He told his wife, "Perhaps he will benefit us, or we shall adopt him as a son." Al-Aziz saw what the caravan merchants missed, that this boy was not merchandise. His instinct to treat Yusuf honorably set the stage for everything that followed. But this same household, this grand home meant to be Yusuf's sanctuary, would soon become the setting of his greatest trial, because the boy from the well was now a servant in the grandest house in Egypt. And the greatest test of his life was still ahead. Years passed in the house of Al-Aziz. The boy from the well grew into a young man, and with each passing season, the beauty that had made merchants stare in the marketplace deepened into something that stopped people mid-sentence. But Yusuf's beauty was not the kind that invited lust alone. It carried an authority, a calm, a presence that made people feel they were standing before someone chosen. And Allah gave him wisdom and knowledge, but someone else had been watching him grow. Zulaykha, the wife of Al-Aziz, had lived with this young man under her roof for years. She had watched him walk through the garden, watched him manage the household affairs, watched his gentleness with servants, watched the way sunlight caught his face when he turned. And what began as fascination hardened into obsession. One evening she locked the doors. Not one door, the doors plural. Scholars say there were 7. 7 doors between the outer hall and the innermost chamber. 7 physical barriers designed to make escape impossible and refusal unthinkable. She turned to Yusuf.
Come to me.
2 words, no pretense, no build-up, just command. Yusuf's answer was immediate.
I seek refuge in Allah. Indeed, He is my master who has made good my residence.
Indeed, wrongdoers will not succeed. And he turned, and he ran. How many doors did she lock? 7 doors between Yusuf and the outside world. 7 locks separating him from every avenue of escape. And nobody was watching. No guard, no servant, no witness. He was alone in a sealed room with a powerful woman who wanted him, in a house where he was merely a servant, in a country where he had no family, no allies, no one to defend him. He could have complied. No one would have seen, no human would have known. He was a servant. Compliance would have brought him favors, comfort, perhaps even power. But Yusuf understood what compliance in private costs, everything in one's relationship with God. He chose refusal not because it was easy, but because the only witness who mattered was watching. And that refusal would cost him everything. She grabbed his shirt from behind, and the fabric tore. At that exact moment, Al-Aziz appeared at the door, his wife in tears. Yusuf standing in a torn shirt, the scene already rewritten by the time the minister arrived.
What is the recompense of one who intended evil for your wife?
Zulaykha cried out, accusation ready, tears already flowing. He tried to come at me, but a witness from her own household spoke before the dust could settle. If his shirt is torn from the front, she has told the truth, and he is of the liars. But if his shirt is torn from the back, then she has lied, and he is of the truthful. Al-Aziz picked up the torn shirt. He turned it over. He examined it, torn from the back. The fabric told the truth just as clearly as the first bloodied shirt had, and just like Yaqub had examined the first shirt and read the evidence, Al-Aziz now held the second shirt and read it too. But where Yaqub responded with Sabr Jamil and placed his trust in Allah, Al-Aziz responded with political calculus and placed his trust in silence. 2 shirts, 2 examinations, 2 very different men, and the comparison reveals the moral distance between a prophet and a politician.
Yusuf, ignore this. And you, ask forgiveness for your sin.
That was Al-Aziz's verdict. Not justice, not a hearing, not even a conversation. Just forget it happened. Move on. He saw the evidence. He held the truth in his hands, literally. The shirt was torn from behind. His wife was guilty. And what did he do? He buried the whole affair.
Why?
because acknowledging the truth would have meant acknowledging that his own wife attempted to seduce a servant under his own roof. It would have been a public scandal, his reputation, his position, his standing in the Egyptian court, all at risk. So he chose silence, and that silence cost an innocent man years in a stone chamber. But the gossip could not be silenced. The wife of Al-Aziz is trying to seduce her servant boy. The whisper moved through the aristocratic circles of Egypt like fire through dry grass. Every gathering, every banquet, every meeting between the noble women of the city carried the same undertone. Zulaykha has lost her mind over a slave. Zulaykha heard every word. And she decided to end the gossip, not by hiding the truth, but by weaponizing it. She invited the most prominent women of the city to a lavish banquet. Fine linen tablecloths, gold-rimmed plates, the best food Egypt could produce. She gave each woman a sharp knife and a piece of citrus fruit, as if for cutting. Then she instructed Yusuf to walk through the room. He entered. The women's hands froze mid-cut. The knives sliced into their own palms and fingers. Blood dripped onto the white linen. Not one of them noticed. They were staring completely, utterly, involuntarily stunned.
"This is no man,"
they whispered.
"This is none but a noble angel."
Zulaykha turned to them with vindication burning in her eyes.
That is the one you blamed me for.
These women came to judge Zulaykha. They left as accomplices. Their involuntary reaction reveals something about human nature. It is easy to condemn a sin we have never been personally confronted with. They gossiped about Zulaykha's obsession from the safety of their own untested virtue. The moment the temptation appeared before them in person, their certainty evaporated along with the skin on their palms. But for Yusuf, this was not vindication, it was escalation. Because now it was not just one woman. Zulaykha and the others issued an ultimatum: comply or be imprisoned. Yusuf stood alone. The corridor stretched before him on one end, a life of comfort and compliance. On the other, a dark stone chamber from which no one would remember to release him. He did not hesitate. He raised his hands in supplication and spoke the words that marked the spiritual summit of this entire story. More important than the throne, more important than the reunion, more important than the forgiveness.
My lord, prison is more beloved to me than that to which they invite me. And if you do not avert from me their plan, I might incline toward them and be of the ignorant.
Prison, more beloved, not more tolerable, not the lesser evil. He used the language of love for a dungeon. Because compared to disobeying God, a stone cell was a sanctuary. The guards came, the door opened. Yusuf walked in willingly. He did not choose between freedom and prison. He chose between sin and his Creator. And he chose his Creator. He could have given in. He could have reasoned that he had no choice. One man against the most powerful woman in Egypt and her entire social circle. He could have told himself that compliance was survival. Instead, he prayed with his hands raised and walked toward the darkness with his eyes open. Everything that follows in this story, the dream interpretation, the ministry, the reunion, the forgiveness, flows from this single moment. Remove this prayer and the entire story collapses. The door closed behind him, and the years began. Inside the prison, Yusuf did not rage. He did not scheme. He did what he had always done. He turned to God, and he turned to people. Other prisoners noticed him. They noticed the calm in his voice, the steadiness of his eyes, the way he treated everyone, guard and inmate alike, with a gentleness that did not belong in a dungeon. 2 cellmates came to him with their dreams.
"I saw myself pressing wine,"
said the first. "I saw myself carrying bread on my head, and birds were eating from it," said the second. Yusuf interpreted both. The first, the cupbearer would be freed and would serve wine to the king again. The second, the baker would be executed, crucified. Birds eating from his head was not a blessing. Before the cupbearer was released, Yusuf made one request.
Mention me to your master. Tell him about me.
The cupbearer nodded. He promised. He walked out of the darkness and into the sunlight. And within days, as the warmth of privilege and comfort wrapped around him again, the man in the stone chamber faded from his memory entirely. Not from malice, from comfort, the cruelest form of forgetting. But Shaitan made him forget the mention to his master, and Yusuf remained in prison several more years. Several more years, scholars say 7, some say as many as 12. Think about that. Years in a stone chamber because a comfortable man forgot a single sentence. The cupbearer was not a villain. He was simply human, and that ordinary human tendency to forget the people we no longer need is what kept a prophet of God in prison while seasons changed through one barred window. Then one night, the king of Egypt had a dream. The king woke drenched in cold sweat, the image still burning behind his eyes. 7 fat cows being devoured by 7 skeletal ones, 7 green ears of grain withering into 7 dry husks. The dream clung to him like smoke. He knew, he could feel it in his chest, that this was not an ordinary dream. He summoned every sage in the court. They gathered in the throne room. Priests, soothsayers, scholars, advisors, men who had spent their lives interpreting omens and reading the stars. One by one, they looked at the king's dream and offered nothing.
Confused dreams, O king. We are not interpreters of visions.
The most powerful empire on earth, with the best minds at its disposal, could not decode a message from God. The answer was not in the throne room. It was locked in the dungeon beneath the king's own palace. But nobody knew that, except one man who had just remembered. The cupbearer, standing at the edge of the court, listening to one failure after another, a memory surfaced. Not out of guilt, out of self-interest. This was his chance to be useful to the king again. He stepped forward.
I will inform you of its interpretation, so send me forth.
He rushed to the prison, down the same corridors he had walked out of years ago, through the same iron gate he had never looked back at. And there, in the dim light of a stone cell, sat the man he had forgotten.
O Yusuf, the man of truth, explain to us about 7 fat cows eaten by 7 lean, and 7 green ears and others dry, that I may return to the people so that they may know.
Yusuf interpreted without hesitation. Plant for 7 consecutive years, as usual. Then 7 years of severe drought would consume what had been stored, all except a small amount reserved for planting. Then a year of relief would follow, when people would be given rain and press oil and wine again. The cupbearer returned to the king with the interpretation. The king was stunned. This was not guesswork. This was clarity. Absolute surgical clarity from a man sitting in a dungeon.
Bring him to me.
The king of Egypt summoned a prisoner. Every logical response, every human instinct pointed one direction: run. Get out, breathe free air, thank God and leave. But Yusuf did something that no one in the royal court expected. He refused. Return to your master, Yusuf told the messenger, and ask him, what is the case of the women who cut their hands? Indeed, my lord is knowing of their plan. A prisoner. Telling a king, I have conditions, a man in chains, dictating terms to the most powerful person in the land. This is what taqwa, consciousness of God, produces. A man who fears God so completely that he does not fear kings. Yusuf understood something that most people spend their entire lives failing to grasp. Freedom without honor is not freedom. A man who walks out of prison with his accusation still. Hanging over him is still a prisoner, just one without walls. He could have walked out immediately. He could have cleared his name later, quietly, privately. Instead, he forced the investigation that no one had ever been willing to conduct. The king questioned the women, and then after years of silence, after years of Yusuf carrying the weight of a lie, that was never his to carry, Zulaykha spoke.
Now the truth has become evident. It was I who sought to seduce him. And indeed, he is of the truthful.
Years of false accusation dissolved by its own author. Zulaykha's confession did what no court could. It restored the one thing prison had stolen from Yusuf. Not his freedom, his name. Only then did Yusuf accept the king's invitation. And when the king met him face to face, he said, "Indeed, you are today established in position and trusted." Yusuf's answer revealed the kind of man prison had produced.
Appoint me over the storehouses of the land. Indeed, I am a knowing guardian.
A man who entered Egypt through the back door, sold as a slave in a marketplace for pocket change, now held the keys to the survival of the entire civilization. 7 years of plenty passed under Yusuf's management. He implemented a grain storage plan of extraordinary precision. Fill the silos, preserve the surplus, seal the storehouses. Egypt, the breadbasket, became the only nation prepared for what was coming. And then the famine struck. It did not creep, it crashed. Crops failed across the entire region, Canaan, Syria, the surrounding lands. Rivers dried, livestock perished. Families began to move, desperate, toward the only place that still had grain, Egypt. Among the waves of starving travelers, 10 rough-robed men walked into Egypt's grain distribution center. They were sunburned, road-worn, their clothes patched, their hands calloused from years of pastoral labor. They knelt before the minister in charge, the man who held the keys to every storehouse in the country, and they begged for provisions. Yusuf recognized them instantly. They did not recognize him. Of course they did not. They had thrown away a boy, they found a minister. They remembered a child in a rough tunic crying for help. They saw a man in gold-trimmed Egyptian linen, speaking the polished accent of the court, carrying the authority of a king's trust. The distance between the boy they abandoned and the man who stood before them was decades, continents, and an entire second language. But think about what that moment must have felt like for Yusuf. Decades of waiting, decades of trusting in God's promise, the whisper in the well. You will inform them while they do not perceive. And now, here they were. Kneeling, asking for his help, needing him. The boy they threw away was the only man who could feed their families. Yusuf gave them grain, but then he said, "Bring me your brother from your father, a younger one. Do you not see that I give full measure and that I am the best of hosts? But if you do not bring him to me, there will be no grain for you, and you shall not come near me." When they returned with Binyamin, Yusuf arranged for his younger brother to be seated near him at the meal. Then privately, away from the 10, away from the guards, he revealed himself to Binyamin alone. The Quran does not record what was said between them, but the silence of two brothers separated since childhood says everything. Then Yusuf planted a golden measuring cup in Binyamin's sack and had his guards discover it, detaining Binyamin as a thief. This was not cruelty. This was a test. Would the brothers abandon another brother? Would they leave Binyamin the way they had left Yusuf? Or had they truly changed? The brothers begged. They pleaded. They said, "Take one of us instead. Our father is old. This will destroy him. Take one of us instead." The same brothers who had once thrown a brother into a well without a second thought were now offering themselves in his place. Something had changed. Something inside them had shifted in the decades since that night by the well. And when Yusuf saw it, when he saw that the transformation was real, he could no longer contain himself. Tears streamed down his face.
Do you know what you did to Yusuf and his brother when you were ignorant?
The brothers stared, their faces went white.
Are you indeed Yusuf?
5 words.
I am Yusuf, and this is my brother.
And then, before they could process the shock, before the guilt could crystallize into something that might break them, he delivered the most powerful forgiveness in all of Scripture.
No blame upon you today. May Allah forgive you, and He is the most merciful of the merciful.
20 years. Slavery, false accusation, prison, every injustice, every stolen year, every moment of loneliness in that stone cell. Dissolved in one sentence, without a single condition, he surrendered his right to justice. After everything, the well, the chains, the lies, the forgotten promise, he could have punished them. Egyptian law would have supported it. His own experience justified it. He held every tool of institutional retribution in his hands. He used none of them. He could have imprisoned them as he was imprisoned. He could have sold them as he was sold. He could have thrown them into a well and walked away as they had walked away. But Yusuf understood something that most people never do. Forgiveness is not a gift to the one who wronged you. It is a release of the weight you have been carrying. And the weight he set down in that throne room freed not just his brothers, it freed him. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam echoed these exact words when he conquered Mecca. Standing before the people who had tortured, exiled, and waged war against him for 20 years.
No blame upon you today.
That is how profound this forgiveness was. Even the final prophet borrowed it. But there was still one more miracle. One more shirt. Yusuf removed his own shirt. He held it out to his brothers and said,
Take this shirt of mine and cast it over the face of my father. He will recover his sight and bring me your family, all of them.
The brothers took the shirt. They began the long journey back to Canaan, carrying something they could not fully comprehend. This was not clothing, this was the third message. The first shirt had been smeared with false blood, a lie designed to end a father's hope. The second shirt had been torn from behind, evidence of innocence buried by a man too weak to honor it. And now the third, Yusuf's own shirt, sent across the desert, carried by the very brothers who had brought the first. Evidence, healing. The same piece of fabric, always telling the truth, always being ignored or doubted by humans, always proven right by God. The shirt is the thread that stitches this entire story together. As the caravan approached Canaan, something extraordinary happened. Yaqub, old, blind, leaning on his staff, lifted his face to the wind.
I find the smell of Yusuf,
he whispered. Those around him exchanged looks. They thought the old man was still lost in his grief. By Allah, they said, you are still in your old delusion about Yusuf. But when the shirt was cast over his eyes, decades of darkness lifted. He could see, his first sight after years of blindness, the faces of the sons who had lied to him, now carrying proof that his grief was not delusion but prophecy. His patience had not been wasted, his tears had not fallen into a void. Every night he had spent calling on God in the dark had been heard.
Did I not tell you that I know from Allah that which you do not know?
Yaqub's blindness was never a punishment. It was a physical expression of the deepest form of grief, the kind that empties you so completely that even your eyes stop working. And his restoration was not a reward for patience. It was the completion of a promise. And then at last, the dream. The entire family entered Egypt. Yaqub restored, walked with his staff across the marble floor. Behind him 11 sons, his wife beside him, they entered the throne room. And they bowed before Yusuf. 11 stars, the sun, the moon. The dream from that morning in the Bedouin tent, finally made real.
Oh, my father,
Yusuf said,
this is the interpretation of my dream from before. My Lord has made it reality.
Go back to the beginning. A boy in a tent tells his father about a dream, 11 stars, the sun and the moon bowing to him. Now count the years. Betrayal, a well, slavery, a marketplace, a palace, temptation, false accusation, prison, a forgotten promise. A king's dream, a confession, a ministry, a famine, a return, a golden cup, a test, a reveal, a forgiveness, a healing shirt. Every single event without exception was a step toward this moment. Remove the brothers' jealousy, no well. Remove the well, no caravan. Remove the caravan, no Egypt. Remove Egypt, no palace. Remove the palace, no temptation. Remove the temptation, no prison. Remove the prison, no dream interpretation. Remove the dream interpretation, no ministry. Remove the ministry, no famine management. Remove the famine, no brothers returning. Remove any single trial, and the dream never comes true. That is not coincidence. That is divine planning, a plan so vast, so detailed, and so patient that it takes an entire human lifetime to unfold. And the boy who dreamed it stood where he always belonged. So what does Sabr Jamil actually mean? Yayak wept until he went blind. That sounds like the opposite of patience, but beautiful patience does not mean no tears. It means no complaints to creation. Yaqub cried every day for decades, but he said, "I only complain of my grief and sorrow to Allah." He directed his pain upward, not outward. He did not blame others. He did not lose faith. He did not say, "Why me?" He said, "I know from Allah what you do not know." And Yusuf did not sit in prison staring at the ceiling. He called people to God. He interpreted dreams. He behaved with such dignity that even guards and inmates recognized him as someone set apart. Sabr Jamil is not passive. It is patient action carried out with full trust that God sees the bigger picture, even when you cannot. And look at the result. Every trial, every injustice, every forgotten promise, every locked door and bloodied shirt and barred window, all of it, every single moment was a stepping stone in a plan that only God could see from the beginning. The question this story leaves us with is not whether God has a plan for us. It is whether we have the patience to let it unfold. But the story of God's prophets does not end here. In the same land where Yusuf once ruled in Egypt, the greatest empire of the ancient world, a new Pharaoh would rise. A tyrant who feared a prophecy. A king who ordered the murder of every newborn son of an entire people. But the child he feared the most, the one baby who survived the massacre, he was raised inside the Pharaoh's own palace, Prophet Musa, alayhi salam. The staff that split the sea, the voice that challenged the most powerful man on earth. A story of liberation that shook the foundations of an empire. Stay tuned. See you in the next episode, inshallah.